What?
What?
He's alive!
Oh god. What the f is this?
Elden Ring's popularity has surged once again as FromSoft's newest expansion, while being flawed with performance issues, some head-scratching boss design, and a few imperfections, is still one of the best gaming drops ever. The bar is so low after seeing $500 League of Legends skins that a $40 DLC, which lives up to the price tag and more, feels amazing as a consumer. So with the game being as popular as ever, there's bound to be some of you who are either new to Elden Ring or want some critical information to ensure the best possible experience. This game is complicated, and in my 1,000 hours of playing it, hardly a single thing has been explained through in-game menus. So today, I have about 20 minutes of the best possible tips that I can give you to help you out. It will range from basic information that really only applies to a brand new player to things that might even help veterans. How do you improve at the game? How do you build a character? What are some of the strategies and tech that high-level players use? How can you play co-op with your friends on PC? And most importantly, how can you practice so you can finally get good? This is how you upgrade from Elden Ring noob to pro. Let's start by how to make the game easier. Elden Ring gives the player the option to change the difficulty much like any other video game does, which might surprise you, but trust me, you can completely break the game in half. The only difference is that with Elden Ring, it's not in a menu anywhere. Making the game easier if you're stuck or if it's your first playthrough is entirely possible, you just need to know the steps. Health is wealth, and vigor is everything. The more health that you have, the more forgiving the game will be. A significant portion of the damage you deal comes from upgrading your weapons, not really the levels, even when the weapon is labeled with S-tier scaling. The reason that advanced players can defeat bosses at level 1 rather simply is because when the weapon is fully upgraded, you will still deal pretty decent damage. And this is also why level 1 challenges are so popular. For an experienced player, it's kind of the best way to play. So when you acquire runes, use them on vigor. You want to push for 50, but you really should consider going as high as 60. For the rest of the skills, don't get baited by putting points in the wrong place. For example, dexterity says that it increases the casting speed of spells, which it does, but it's so minor and would never be better or more DPS than leveling your intelligence to 80. The arcane stat increases the buildup of status effects like bleed and increases your discovery, which gives you better luck at farming for rare drops, but neither of those would make arcane worth leveling unless your build directly needs it. You don't want to put a few points into everything, and instead should streamline your build and figure out exactly what you need. Again, when all else fails, just level vigor. Summons and spirit ashes are incredibly powerful. Some of them aren't very good, like this noble sorcerer who doesn't do anything to this dragon and cowers away in fear, but yes, most of them are strong and you should use them. There's a somewhat common gatekeeper attitude that using summons is cheating or easy mode, but they're put into the game for a reason and are intended to be used. The beautiful part of Elden Ring is that if you like fighting a boss so much and you want to master their moveset, you could always just start another playthrough and go back and fight the boss without the summons. This is a true sandbox game. If you want to try for a challenge run and put your skills to the test, go for it. You as the player get to decide how hard you think the game should be. Without question, the most popular summon is the Mimic tier, which makes a copy of your character. It can grab the aggro for you, deal substantial damage, and can even heal you if you set up your own kit with healing spells. Playing with a summon versus without is a night and day difference, so if you're struggling, use them. There's a buff in this game that you need to become familiar with. It's called Golden Vow, and this is a bread and butter spell that is used in every playthrough and every build. It's an AoE spell that even buffs your allies, including Spirit Ashes. Very early into the game, you can kill this knight in Stormhill and get the Ash of War version. This is a weaker variation, but it's very simple to just throw this on a dagger or any other lightweight weapon. If you don't have a dagger, you can buy one from the Round Table Hold. There's an incantation version of this spell in Mount Gelmir that requires 25 faith, and it's even stronger than the Ash of War. And with the new DLC, you can even craft the buff as a consumable. 25 faith sounds like it would be a decent investment to take away from your vigor or strength build, but Elden Ring has a lot of ways to temporarily increase your levels. Godric's Great Rune will buff all of your stats by 5, and the Physic Flask for plus 10 faith is picked up very early on into the game in Weeping Peninsula, so even without a faith build, you can cast Golden Vow incantation very easily. Let's talk about strong talismans and where to find them. The best defensive talisman in the game is called Ritual Shield. It is found in Leyndell, and as soon as you can begin wearing this, you should. Any one-hit grab move from a boss that would normally insta-kill you now no longer does. Anytime an attack is supposed to chunk your HP, it gets massively cut down, allowing you to health pot back to full and reactivate the Ritual Shield. The amount of effective HP that this talisman gives you is unrivaled by anything else in the game since it is all damage types. There are other talismans that are found much later into the game, like the Dragon Crest Great Shield talisman for physical damage, or the DLC has the Golden Braid which massively reduces holy damage, but these are not the best in slot everywhere all the time like Ritual Shield is. The opposite of Ritual Shield is Ritual Sword, which technically can be picked up almost right away after starting a new playthrough since it is dropped from a very easy boss. Both of these talismans are great as they don't require some long convoluted quest to acquire them, so when building any character setup, if you're not sure what is good, you can never go wrong with 2 out of your 4 talisman slots being taken up by the Ritual Talismans. The same thing goes for Green Turtle and the Axe Talisman. Both of them are found right away at the beginning of the game and require no bosses to be killed. However, the premier early game talisman is found in Fort Faroth in Caelid. It's a bit tricky to obtain if you don't know the tech, so let me show you how. Before entering the fort, there's a merchant off to the west that will sell a beast repellent torch. You want to buy this from him, but make sure that it's not nighttime when you do, because this merchant can actually turn into a very difficult boss during nighttime. You can walk up to the fort and hit the outside wall with a weapon. What this does is make noise which alerts the enemies inside and they will investigate the sound. This will buy you enough space to get past the first room, and don't miss the first chest as it has one of the halves of the Dectus medallion, and this is a key item. When you continue on through the fort, the beast repellent torch is clutch as it will scare away the rats, which in the early game will completely destroy you. Poise is a term that is overwhelmingly important to understand, yet is misunderstood by many. Elden Ring has 2 types of damage: health damage and poise damage. Health damage is very simple and is consistent with basically every other video game you've ever played. You have an attack that does a certain amount of damage, the enemy has a certain amount of resistance to that damage and type, and that calculates how much damage you deal. Poise damage, on the other hand, is an entirely separate system. Enemies do not resist poise, they just have an amount of it. A pretty common boss poise value is 80, but some of the harder bosses even have as high as 120. The poise damage that you deal is independent of health damage, meaning that if your weapon is unupgraded at level 0, this does not affect how much poise damage you will deal. Once an enemy's poise reaches 0, they are knocked down and left vulnerable for a critical hit. Most of the time, the amount of poise damage that a weapon will deal is based on the weightiness of the weapon. For example, a big old club is going to deal much more poise damage than a little dagger. The dagger is better raw DPS because usually it has innate bleed buildup for big damage, but the club has the ability to stun the enemy. This is why the game has 2 types of attacks, a light attack and a heavy attack. If you hold down a charged heavy, you will deal the maximum amount of poise damage. The thing about poise is that unlike health, it will regenerate after a certain amount of time. In order to keep your progress on the poise, you need to continually damage the boss, and this is where players can get creative and use consumables like throwing daggers or knives. They're not throwing these because they necessarily care about the damage that it does, but rather what they're doing is making sure that the boss's poise doesn't reset during times where it's difficult to hit them. But the ability to stagger is not exclusive to strength builds. Mages can do great poise damage with gravity sorceries like Rock Sling. Any class in the game is capable of using an offhand weapon with an Ash of War like Glintblade Phalanx in order to help get staggers. Dexterity users can throw knives and fan daggers to keep the poise from resetting. And every class is capable of using skillful parries to get critical hits. There are different load types that affect your ability to dodge: light load, medium load, heavy, and overloaded. The way it determines what load you're set on is by a simple threshold system. Once you're above a certain percentage of the maximum, that is when you'll reach the next tier. 99% of the time you are perfectly fine being medium load, and I suspect that most of you have been told this before. Medium load allows you to wear solid armor and have a very good roll. For casual playthroughs, this is great. But what about the other loads? Is there any merit to light or heavy? Well, yeah, there is. Heavy load can be used for ultra tank builds that don't really rely on rolling, but rather sustain and trading. There are plenty of videos on YouTube of players going mega tank and quite literally powering through the game like an absolute stud. These builds make heavy load work perfectly fine, but you have to have a game plan to use it correctly. In the new DLC, there's even a talisman that buffs heavy load by a lot. Light load, on the other hand, becomes very important when talking about challenge runs and no-hit gameplay. When light rolling, you gain a little bit of extra distance, which in some cases makes all of the difference between either getting hit or not. And the best example for me that comes to mind is Godric's Storm attack. This attack is quite easy to get out of when you're light rolling, but on medium load, you have to predict it and know it's coming. There are two types of weapons, unique and infusible. A unique weapon will require somber stones to upgrade, which generally speaking are easier to acquire since you only need 1 per level, and the max level is only 10. What makes the weapon unique is that you can't change the Ash of War or the type of scaling that the weapon has. Typically, these are going to be weapons that are flashy and have some unique Ash of War that is only found on that weapon, or are dropped from a boss and it's like the boss's weapon. The infusible weapons are typically a standard simple weapon that allows you to customize them and grease them. These will upgrade with regular smithing stones as opposed to somber, which are a little bit more difficult to obtain. And when I say customizable, I really do mean it. If you take the standard Uchi katana from the samurai starting class, once you acquire different Ashes of War and wet blades, you can turn this into whatever katana you want it to be. You could put an Ash of War like Sacred Blade on it and make it a holy katana that scales with faith, or you could make it cold, which gives it a freezing status effect and adds some intelligence scaling. There are merits to using both weapon types, but the reason that somber weapons are generally more popular is because there's a blacksmith called EG that can instantly upgrade your somber to a 4 out of 10. Since the infusible weapons require a lot more smithing stones and go up to level 25, and there's not some sort of equivalent merchant to EG, you have to work a little bit harder to get the regular smithing stones during the early parts of a playthrough. Guard counter is a mechanic that is underutilized by players because shields are a little bit forgotten about in this game. I think because Elden Ring has so many crazy offensive builds that look really good in YouTube videos and for montages, many disregard the effect of a good old sword and board. After successfully blocking an attack, you can follow up with a heavy attack for very quick retaliation, and it will make this sound. This is called a guard counter, and it's basically the equivalent of a charged heavy attack, but it will come out much faster. Guard counters do a ton of poise damage and allow you to block an attack. This works perfectly fine with medium shields, but in order to get the best results, you really need a great shield. Unfortunately, some of the strongest shields in the game are found quite late, and the best shield in the game, which is the fingerprint shield, is found somewhat late into the game in a tricky location. But if you're interested in using a shield, you need to get this one. The best way to get early runes in a new playthrough is all in one condensed area of the game, over in Dragon Barrow in Eastern Caelid. Many players know by now that you can kill the Elder Dragon Grail and get behind her as she can't attack back. She has a ton of health though and takes a while to kill, so make sure you're trying to use the bleed status effect to speed this up a lot. Bleed takes a chunk of maximum health every time it is procced. Since the hitbox is very precise, you can attack her while you're on torrent and make sure your character doesn't move and ruin your spot. Now, in this area there are 2 other cheeses that you can do for even more runes. The Knight's Cavalry on the bridge has a certain fascination for throwing himself off this branch for his 42k runes. This can be done yourself by luring him over with torrent and jumping over the branch, but it's pretty inconsistent to do it this way and is very dangerous. The best strategy is by using precise cookery throws that you can practice. When throwing these make noise where you can lure him over to the branch and he will throw himself off. It takes some practice, but if you commit to learning it, it's a simple way to pick up early runes for any new playthrough, and it's obviously hilarious. The other cheese is for Flying Dragon Grail on the bridge. He's worth 80k runes, so if you're able to get it, it's worth it, but a lot of the time, this is inconsistent and difficult, and I almost never do it. It might take you a few tries, but if you can get it to work, there's a funny T-pose that will reward you with 80k runes. The Godskin enemies are infamous in this game, especially for the duo fight that is found later on, but a long time ago players found out that they're very vulnerable to sleep. Early on in the game, you can pick up the cookbook to throw sleep pots, or if you like sleep arrows, those are easy to grab as well in Limgrave. As for the mushrooms and Trina's lily to make them, mushrooms are found everywhere, and there's a lot of Trina's lily that can be picked up in Liurnia near the village of the Albinarix. There's a tree where you can pick them up. And lastly, if you feel like your build has fallen off at some of the late game bosses, one of the reasons that might be is if your build is dealing holy damage. For whatever reason, many of the game's late game bosses resist holy damage by a lot. Now, this is counteracted by the fact that Holy is unbelievably strong against undead enemies like Deathbirds, where you can legitimately one-shot them, but if your Holy build is hurting you, you can consider switching it up and throwing Faith Fire spells instead of Faith Holy spells. The reality is that fire damage is just a better damage type against many of the mandatory bosses. But something that is nice is that FromSoft maybe felt bad about holy damage in the base game or wanted to make up for their sins, and now holy damage in the DLC is quite good and maybe is the best damage type to use. Thankfully, no more 80% holy resistance on all of the bosses. In the final section of this video, I'm going to talk about a couple extra things that don't really have to do with the game itself, but rather your experience playing it. Elden Ring has multiplayer, but FromSoft's default multiplayer is bare bones and limited. When you play on console or with vanilla multiplayer on PC, it's nowhere near the traditional co-op experience that you would expect. This is by design, and their games have always been this way, but it's 2024, and I know that a lot of players just want to play with their friends. On PC, one of the most popular gaming mods to ever be created is called Seamless Co-op, and it does exactly what it says. It allows you to play Elden Ring with your friends. Now, because it's a mod, there are a lot of bugs and issues with it, none of which will ruin the experience enough to be unplayable, but there is a real chance that you will encounter problems along the way. Make frequent backups of your saves, go through the forum posts and check the FAQs, and try not to get too frustrated when things don't work. I'll be making a more in-depth video that has a full seamless co-op guide and what I recommend you to do in order to get a better player experience. Once that video comes out, there will be a link in the description down below. Finally, after completing a few playthroughs of the game, I think everybody should know and understand that Elden Ring is a game where cheating is not only common, but I highly recommend it. What do I mean by that? I recommend that you cheat? Yeah, I do. Mods like Cheat Engine or the Practice Tool allow you to play in a sort of creative mode. You can turn on God mode, spawn items, teleport around, show the hitboxes, and quickly build a character. And I do this all the time. I have 1,000 hours in Elden Ring, and I can assure you that not all of that is running around exploring on Torrent. There's a lot to see in this game, more than any other game I've ever played, but not 1,000 hours worth. Most of my time is done by turning on God mode and practicing a boss's moveset so I can perfect it and learn how to no-hit it. Every challenge runner and veteran player uses these tools to practice and do cool playthroughs, and for anybody who loves this game, it adds so much replayability. I've always thought that Elden Ring is a true sandbox and would benefit a lot from a creative mode, so right now on PC, this is the best workaround. Anyway, that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Please feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments down below. And if there are any video ideas or things you want me to explain or make videos about, please let me know in the comments down below. If there's anything at all that you'd like me to talk about when it comes to Elden Ring, I'm happy to hear it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.